The rain came down over Mayfair like a curtain drawn by an indifferent god. It did not fall prettily, the way rain sometimes does in late spring, in thin silver threads that catch the lamplight and make the cobblestones shine like mirrors. No, this was October rain, mean and determined, the kind that soaked through wool cloaks and turned the gutters into rivers of brown water and worse. The townhouses along Grosvenor Square stood firm against it, their white facades darkened to grey, their iron railings beaded with cold, their curtained windows leaking warm yellow light that made the street below feel all the colder by contrast. Inside one particular drawing room on the south side of the square, a fire burned low in the grate, not because the family could not afford more coal, but because no one had thought to tend it. The servants had been dismissed early. The housekeeper, a stout woman named Mrs. Pruitt, had retreated to her warm basement quarters an hour ago, and the parlour maids had followed. The house was nearly silent except for the rain against the glass, and the sound, very faint, of someone turning pages. She sat in the chair nearest the dying fire, not because it gave much warmth anymore, but because the light, what little remained of it, reached the book in her lap. Miss Cecily Wren was not reading for pleasure. She was reading the household ledgers, which she had disguised inside the cover of a novel, so that if anyone entered the room, they would assume she was wasting her time with fiction, as they always assumed, and leave her alone. The numbers were not kind. They were never kind. Cecily was 23 years old. She had dark hair that she wore simply because elaborate arrangements required a lady's maid, and she had not had one in 2 years, not since she had quietly told her father the expense was unnecessary and routed the savings toward the quarterly coal bill. She had grey eyes, the kind that changed colour in different lights, though no one had remarked upon them in so long that she had ceased to think of them as a feature worth remarking upon. She was not short, not tall. She was not plump, not thin. She was, in the estimation of most of London society, simply present, a woman who occupied a room without compelling anyone to look at her twice. This was, she had come to understand, both a wound and a weapon. The fire spat. A log shifted. She turned the ledger page and noted that the quarterly debt to their wine merchant had gone unpaid for 3 months. Her father had not noticed, or had noticed and chosen not to care, which was much the same thing. Her stepmother would have noticed only if the wine itself ran out, and Cecily's half-sister, Miss Dorothea Wren, 17, blonde, fashionable, already the talk of the smaller drawing rooms of Mayfair, would not have known there was a wine merchant at all. Dorothea was the jewel. Cecily was the hinge that held the door on which the jewel was displayed. This was the arrangement, and no one in the Wren household had ever spoken it aloud, because it did not need to be spoken. It was simply the weather of the house, like the damp that crept under the drawing-room window in November, or the way the third stair from the top creaked at night. It was there. It did not change. You worked around it. Cecily closed the ledger, tucked it back behind the novel, and looked at the fire. They owed money to 7 separate creditors. Her father's estate in Shropshire, the one that had kept the family comfortable for 2 generations, had been mortgaged twice over. They were, in the polite language of their set, in straitened circumstances. In plain language, they were nearly ruined. And the only plan her father had articulated, in his vague, hopeful, maddening way, was that Dorothea would make a splendid match, and the splendid match would save them. It was not an unreasonable plan. Dorothea was very beautiful. It was only unreasonable in that it had not yet succeeded, and that Dorothea was 17, and had the practical understanding of a well-brushed spaniel, and that splendid matches required a season, and a season required new gowns, and new gowns required money they did not have, and the person who had been quietly selling her mother's jewellery piece by piece to fund these expeditions was sitting in a cold drawing room pretending to read a novel. The door opened. Her stepmother, Lady Wren, a title she wore as though she had been born to it rather than acquired it by marrying a baronet of middling prospects, swept into the room in a cloud of rosewater and self-satisfaction. She was a handsome woman in the way that expensive furniture is handsome, well-maintained, deliberately placed, created to impress at first glance, and to be sat upon by no one. "Are you sitting in the dark again?" she said, as though this were both surprising and morally suspect. "The fire is low," Cecily said. "Ring for someone." I dismissed them for the evening. Lady Wren gave her the look she always gave her, which was the look one gives a piece of furniture that has been placed in the wrong room. Then she forgot about Cecily entirely, which was the usual sequence of events, and moved to the window, parting the curtain to peer at the rain-washed street outside. "His Grace's man came this afternoon," she said. Cecily set down her book. This was, she understood immediately, news of the significant kind. The Duke of Haverstone. That was who Lady Wren meant, because there was only one Duke of any consequence in their current calculations, and his name had been spoken in hushed and reverent tones in this house for 3 months, ever since some mutual acquaintance had mentioned. At a dinner Cecily had managed on £8 less than her stepmother believed the dinner had cost, that the Duke of Haverstone was in search of a wife. "What did his man say?" Cecily asked. "His Grace will call on us Thursday." Lady Wren let the curtain fall. "For Dorothea, of course. Of course. Thursday," Cecily said. "That is 2 days from now." "Yes, I am aware of how calendars function, Cecily." Lady Wren smoothed her skirts, already planning. "Dorothea will need her blue muslin pressed, and we will need the drawing room properly aired. And something done about that settee. The arm is still broken." "I will see to it," Cecily said. She always saw to it. This was the thing that no one in the house understood about Cecily Wren. She saw to things. She had been seeing to things since she was 15 years old, and her mother died, and her father, who was a gentle, distracted man who had never quite understood the domestic machinery his wife had run, had looked at his eldest daughter with the helpless expression of a man watching a clock he did not know how to wind. And Cecily, who had been watching her mother for 15 years, had wound it herself. She had wound it every day since. She saw to the settee. She saw to the pressed muslin. She saw to the flowers, the arrangement of the best china, the careful hiding of the second-best silver that had been sold the previous spring, and whose absence she masked by setting the table differently. She saw to Dorothea's hair, and Dorothea's gloves, and the little speech Dorothea was to give about her accomplishments, because Dorothea tended, when nervous, to mention that she could play the pianoforte and then stop speaking, which did not make an impressive inventory. She saw to all of it. And on Thursday, when the Duke of Haverstone was shown into their drawing room, Cecily sat in the corner near the window with her needlework, and was not introduced. His Grace, Callum Ashford, the 6th Duke of Haverstone, was not what she expected. She had expected a duke of the common London variety, older, comfortable with his own importance, the kind of man who inspected women the way he might inspect a horse at Tattersall's, with a practiced eye and no particular feeling. She had expected grey at the temples, perhaps, and a watch chain, and a certain heaviness about the jaw that wealth and idleness tended to produce in men past 40. He was 32. He was tall, not in the obvious theatrical way of men who knew they were being looked at, but in the natural way of a man who had grown to that height without thinking about it. His hair was dark and needed cutting by ½ an inch, which was the kind of detail no one else in the room would have noticed, because they were all too busy noticing that he was a duke. His face was severe in the resting state, the kind of face that looked as though it had made a decision at some point not to express unnecessary things. There was a scar at the edge of his jaw, faint and old, that someone had once tried to give him and failed. He sat in the best chair, which Lady Wren had positioned to catch the best light, and he listened to Dorothea play the pianoforte. Dorothea played adequately. She smiled beautifully. She said all the things she had been coached to say, and she said them in the right order, and she looked exactly as she was supposed to look, which was young and fair and promising, and exactly the sort of girl a duke in search of an heir and a decorative duchess might select. The Duke of Haverstone listened. He nodded at the appropriate intervals. He was perfectly, exhaustingly polite. And once, only once, his eyes moved across the room to the window, where Cecily sat with her needlework, and lingered for the space of 3 full seconds before moving away. She went back to her needlework. He was escorted out by her father 40 minutes later, with much warmth on her father's side and measured civility on the Duke's, and then Lady Wren declared it a triumph, and Dorothea asked whether she thought he would ask for a second meeting, and Cecily went to the kitchen to instruct cook on the week's marketing budget. She thought nothing more about those 3 seconds. She could not have known then what they would cost her. We'll take a very short break. If you don't want to miss new stories, please subscribe to the channel. The Duke of Haverstone did not, in fact, want a wife. This is the important thing to understand about Callum Ashford. The thing that his solicitor understood, but would not say aloud. The thing his housekeeper at the great estate of Ashford Park in Derbyshire understood but said only to the scullery maid when she was quite sure no one else was listening. He did not want a wife. He had wanted one, once, with the earnest and somewhat reckless want of a very young man who had read too much poetry and not enough common sense. He had been 24. He had believed himself in love. He had married. The marriage had been in the civil language of those who knew them, difficult in the private language of the man who had lived it. It had been a 7-year education in what happens when mutual infatuation is mistaken for mutual understanding. His late Duchess had been lovely and spirited, and had hated Derbyshire with an absolute and unapologetic passion, and had spent the 6 months of each year she was required to reside there, making her feelings known in ways that were creative and exhausting. She had died 4 years ago, not tragically, not dramatically, but of a fever in Bath that progressed faster than anyone expected, and Callum had grieved her in the complicated, honest way that people grieve those they both loved and were worn thin by, and then he had returned to Derbyshire and remained there for 3 years with no particular intention of emerging. His solicitor had broken the intention. There was, the solicitor had explained, in the careful language of a man about to say something his employer would not like, the matter of the entail. Ashford Park and the dukedom could not, should his grace die without an heir, pass to the nearest male relation, because the nearest male relation was a cousin in Edinburgh who had 7 children, no money, and a talent for spectacular mismanagement that had already ruined one modest estate in the borders. The entail would hold, the estate would pass, and within a decade, the man the 6th Duke had spent 20 years restoring to prosperity would be a ruin. So, Callum had come to London. He had called on 3 families. He had sat in 3 drawing rooms and listened to 3 young women play instruments of varying quality, and he had been utterly, comprehensively unmoved. And then he had gone back to his rooms in Mayfair and drunk a glass of excellent whiskey and looked at the ceiling and thought about nothing in particular until he fell asleep. The 4th family was the Wrens. He had gone in no particular spirit of hope. He had gone because his solicitor had mentioned them, and because Miss Dorothea Wren was said to be pretty and accomplished, and because he needed, above all things at this stage of his investigation, to finish the matter. He would select someone suitable. He would be decently kind to her. She would not be required to love him, nor he to love her, which would spare them both a great deal of effort. They would manage. He had sat in that drawing room. He had listened to the pianoforte. And then, in the middle of Dorothea's very proficient rendition of a piece that was clearly meant to impress, his gaze had done the thing his gaze had been doing lately in drawing rooms, which was drift away from the girl he was supposed to be assessing and find somewhere else to rest. It found the window. It found the woman at the window. She was not doing anything notable. She was working a needle through a piece of fabric with the quiet, efficient movements of someone who did this often and well. She did not look up. She was not, he thought, performing her needlework for an audience. She was simply doing it. There was a small frown of concentration on her face that she was plainly unaware of. Her dark hair had been pinned up, but one piece had come loose at the temple, and she had not noticed, or had noticed and decided it could wait. The light from the window, The only good light in the room fell across her hands and the fabric and the side of her face. He had looked for 3 seconds. Then he had looked away, because looking was the action of a man with a reason to look, and he could not have explained the reason if he tried. He did not think about her when he left. He thought about her on the way home. He thought about her when his man of business mentioned, in passing, that the Wren family's financial situation was somewhat more precarious than their address suggested, that the baronet's estate was deeply mortgaged, that the family lived largely on credit and management, and that whoever managed the credit and the management appeared to do so with considerable skill, given what they had to work with. He thought Miss Dorothea was presented as the family's asset. She played the pianoforte and smiled, and had learned the things she was supposed to learn. She had not, in 40 minutes, asked a single question of anyone, nor had she said anything that was not rehearsed. He thought about 3 seconds. He thought about a needle and a ledger spine visible just beneath a novel's cover, which he had noticed because he noticed things, which was one of the small private skills of a man who had spent 7 years inside a difficult marriage and learned to read rooms the way some men read maps. He sent a note to his solicitor the next morning. He asked a particular kind of question. The answer came back in 2 days, and it was not what he had expected. And it was exactly what he had suspected. There was no Miss Wren specified in the letters that had been exchanged regarding a possible match. There was only the Wren family, and the question of which daughter, and no one had thought to make this specific, because everyone had assumed that the choice was obvious. The pretty one, the young one, the one displayed in the drawing room like a painting selected for a particular wall. Callum looked at that information for a long time. He went back to Grosvenor Square on a Thursday. He did not send word ahead. He was shown into the drawing room by a maid who appeared to have been interrupted in the middle of something, and who found him on the doorstep before anyone had prepared for him, and who, this was the part that interested him, did not run to find her mistress, but instead showed him into the morning room and said, with a composure that seemed entirely natural, "I shall tell Miss Wren you are here, Your Grace." Not Lady Wren. Not the family. Miss Wren. He waited. The woman who entered the room 3 minutes later was not Dorothea. Cecily stopped in the doorway when she saw him. 1 second. 2, 3, Your Grace, she said. "I apologize. I believe there has been some confusion. My stepmother is not at home, and my sister is. I did not come to see your stepmother," he said. "Or your sister." She looked at him with those grey eyes that were doing something interesting in the morning light, shifting between grey and a dark sort of blue, and she said nothing, which was, he thought, exactly the right response. "Sit down, Miss Wren," he said. She sat. Not because he had told her to, he thought, but because she had assessed the situation with the rapid efficiency of someone accustomed to assessing situations rapidly, and had decided that sitting was the appropriate position for whatever this was. "I am going to be direct with you," he said, "because I find I do not have the patience for the alternative, and I suspect you do not, either. That is a great deal to suspect about a woman you have met once," she said. "You were reading the household ledgers," he said, "not a novel." I could see the column format on the right-hand page. She was very still. "I see," she said. "I am in need of a wife," he said, "not in the romantic sense. I want that clear from the start. I require someone who can manage a very large estate, who can navigate London society without embarrassing either of us, and who will not be unhappy in Derbyshire. I am told Ashford Park is beautiful if one is not the sort of person who requires a great deal of company. And what," she said, very carefully, "does any of this have to do with me?" "I am asking whether you would be willing," he said, "to present yourself for a period of 6 weeks as my intended." Not my wife. My intended. In order for me to satisfy certain obligations in London, while allowing both of us time to determine whether a permanent arrangement would be tolerable. She looked at him. "You are asking me to play your fiancée," she said. "For a season," he said. Yes. And at the end of this season, we reassess, he said. Should either party find the arrangement unsuitable, a mutual severance can be arranged with minimum damage to your reputation, given that I am perfectly willing to accept that any broken engagement was the result of my deficiencies rather than yours. Cecily Wren looked at the Duke of Haverstone for a very long moment. She thought about the ledger. She thought about 7 creditors. She thought about Dorothea's blue muslin and the broken settee arm, and the 3 years she had spent managing everything while occupying no particular position in anything. "What are your deficiencies?" she asked. Something shifted in his face, so small that she almost missed it. It was almost a smile. "I am cold," he said. "I am told I am difficult. I am not good at parties. I am better with land accounts than with small talk, and I have been a widower long enough that I have entirely lost whatever social habits I once possessed. These are considerable deficiencies," she said. "Yes," he said. "And you are asking me to stand beside a man with these deficiencies before all of London society, and be looked at and assessed and, what is the word they use? Pitied." She said it flatly, not with self-pity but with the cool accuracy of a woman who had lived long enough in her particular position to know the vocabulary society used for women in it. "They will say, 'You could not do better.' They will say that," he agreed. "They will say I must be desperate, very likely. And you," she said, "do not care what they say." "I have not cared what anyone said about me since I was 27, he said. "I find it considerably easier." She should have said no. She knew she should have said no. A sensible woman with any self-regard would have said no, would have seen this for what it was on its surface. An eccentric duke with an insufficient idea of decency arriving at her door to propose she make herself available for public judgment. And she would have shown him out, and then, later when she was alone, she might have sat in the cold drawing room and stared at the fire and felt the familiar, settled weight of being invisible inside her own life. She said, "I have conditions." He looked at her. Now it was not almost a smile. It was attention, focused and complete, the way a man looks at a map when he has found on it something he did not expect to find. "Name them," he said. "My family's debts," she said. "The most pressing ones. 7 creditors. I have the figures. I have the figures. I will give them to you, and they will be settled, and I will not be thanked for it publicly, and my family will not be told it came from you directly. It will be arranged through a solicitor as a matter of estate management." "Agreed," he said. "I will accompany you to whatever events you require. I will be civil. I will be presented appropriately, and I will conduct myself in a manner that does not embarrass you, but I will not pretend to feelings I do not have, and I will not be made to perform devotion like a circus act. I would not ask you to," he said. And then, quieter, "I would not know what to do with it if you did. And at the end of 6 weeks," she said, "whatever we decide, I return to this house as a woman who turned down a duke's proposal on grounds of incompatibility, not as someone who was discarded. Is that understood?" "Completely," he said. There was a silence. Outside, a cart horse clattered by on the wet cobblestones. "Very well," said Cecily Wren. "I will play your fiancée, your grace." She did not know, sitting in that small morning room with the grey October light coming through the window, that she was agreeing to the most publicly scrutinized 6 weeks of her life. She did not know that London would be watching. She did not know that what society saw as charity, a duke, out of some eccentricity or pity, raising up a woman no one had ever particularly noticed, would be refracted through drawing rooms and clubs, and the sharp, particular intelligence of one woman who had made it her life's work to arrange these things to her own advantage. She did not know about Lady Constance Merritt. She was about to. Lady Constance Merritt was 30, unmarried by choice rather than circumstance, and possessed of a face and a fortune and a social intelligence so precise that most of Mayfair was slightly afraid of her, without knowing why. She had been, 3 years ago, expected to become the Duchess of Haverstone. This was not a story that either party discussed. It was simply known, in the way these things are known. Through the accumulation of small observations, that they had been seen together often the season before the late Duchess died, that they had danced twice at a particular ball in Belgrave Square, that Constance Merritt had spent one entire winter in a state of controlled, elegant fury that had expressed itself mainly in the destruction of 2 other women's social seasons for no apparent reason. When the news came that the Duke of Haverstone had announced his intentions toward a Miss Wren, not the young, pretty one, but the other one, Lady Constance sat very still in her drawing room and smiled the kind of smile that has nothing to do with pleasure. "Cecily Wren," she said to her companion, who was a small, worried woman named Mrs. Hargreave, whose primary function was to be present. "I have met her father, I think. A baronet? In considerable debt? So I understand," said Mrs. Hargreave, "and this is who he has chosen," said Lady Constance. "Poor creature. He cannot possibly mean it seriously." This was stage 1. Private dismissal, spoken in a room with no witnesses except a woman paid not to repeat things, though she would repeat them, because such women always do. The engagement was announced. Cecily was taken to Ashford House on Portman Square, and met the household and stood in the entrance hall with its 30-foot ceiling and its portraits of 6 generations of Ashfords, and felt, for the first time since childhood, like someone standing in a house that was real and solid and intended to last centuries. And something in her chest did a thing she chose not to examine. The Duke showed her the library. It was the size of the entire ground floor of her father's Grosvenor Square house, and it smelled of leather and old paper, and something that might have been cedar, and it had not, she could see, been properly opened or tended in years. The curtains were drawn, the shelves were dusty. There was a round table in the center of the room, good mahogany, pushed against the wall, as though someone had moved it once and never moved it back. "It was my wife's habit to work in here," he said. "She preferred a long table. The round one was taken away." He said it flatly, without particular emotion, the way you say a fact about a house. The fireplace in the east wing smokes. The kitchen garden faces north. The round table was taken away. Cecily looked at the room. She looked at the dust and the drawn curtains and the displaced table. "May I use the library?" she said. He looked at her. "I am a better correspondent than anyone in my family," she said. "I manage accounts. I write 3 times the letters my father writes, because someone must. If I am to be genuinely useful during these 6 weeks, I will need a proper workspace. You may use whatever room you like," he said. "I would like the library," she said, "and the round table." 1 second. 2. He almost said something. Whatever it was, he stopped it, and said instead, "I will have it restored." It was restored the next morning. She found it in the center of the room, the round table, polished and placed in the light, and she stood in the doorway for a moment and felt the specific satisfaction of a practical thing made right, and then she sat down and opened the estate accounts he had left for her to review, because he had left them for her without being asked, which was the first thing he had done that surprised her. Stage 2 came in the 3rd week. It came at a dinner at the Eversley house, one of those long, crowded Mayfair evenings where 40 people sat down to 12 courses, and the real business of the evening happened not at the table, but in the intervals between, in the shifting of people between rooms, in the particular art of being overheard. Cecily wore her best dress, which was 2 seasons old, and which she had altered so carefully that no one who did not know the gown in its original form could have said that anything was wrong with it. She had done her own hair, because she now had the use of Ashford House's household, and had specifically chosen not to request a lady's maid, because she was not yet the Duchess, and she did not think it would be appropriate. She was standing near the fire in the music room when she heard Lady Constance's voice, pitched with the precise calculation of a woman who knew exactly how sound traveled in a room of this size. "Of course, it is a charity arrangement," she was saying to 2 women Cecily did not know, but recognized from Almack's. What else could it possibly be? The man has spent 4 years in Derbyshire without speaking to a soul. He arrives in London and selects the most obscure woman available, someone no one has ever looked at twice. It is his way of not actually engaging. He can point to the engagement and say he has made an effort, and everyone will know it signifies nothing. "Poor Miss Wren," murmured one of the women, with the particular sympathy that means the opposite. "Oh, I think she understands what it is," said Lady Constance. "Women like that always do. They are practical. She has made a calculation. He has made a gesture. In 6 weeks they will both have been seen to try, and nothing further will be required of either of them." Cecily did not turn around. She looked at the fire. She pressed her lips together and breathed through her nose and counted 1 and 2 and 3, and then she let it out slowly, the way you let something go when you decide you are not going to spend yourself on it today. She had learned long ago that tears changed nothing. She had made herself that rule at 15. Standing in her mother's empty bedroom after the last mourner had left, and she had kept it every day since. She was not going to break it for Lady Constance Merritt. She turned away from the fire and found the Duke of Haverstone standing 3 feet away. He had heard. She could see that he had heard. His face was doing the thing it sometimes did, the controlled, entirely composed stillness of a man keeping a great deal of himself very quiet, but his eyes were darker than usual, and there was a set to his jaw that she had not seen before. "Are you well?" he said. "Perfectly," she said. He looked at her for a moment in that direct, undecorated way he had, and then he offered her his arm, and she took it. And they walked into supper together with all of London watching them, and she did not let a single thing she was feeling show on her face. In the carriage home, he said nothing about what he had heard. He said, after a long silence, "You manage the household at Grosvenor Square." "Yes," she said. "For how long?" "Since I was 15. Another silence. "You mentioned your letters," he said. "The accounts. You said you were a better correspondent than your father." "I did not say it as a boast," she said. "It is simply accurate." "I know," he said. "I have been giving you the estate accounts to review for 2 weeks." She looked at him. "You have made 17 notations," he said. 12 of them identified errors my steward has been making for 3 years without my noticing. 3 of them suggested economies I intend to implement. 2 of them were questions, and they were the right questions to ask. The carriage rolled on through the dark streets. "Why are you telling me this?" she said. He looked out the window. In profile, she could see the old scar at the edge of his jaw, pale against his skin. "Because someone said something in there," he said, "that suggested you are a woman who does not fully understand her own worth. And I object to it." She was very still. He looked back at her. "That is all," he said. "I merely object to it." It was almost a declaration. Almost. She thought about it for 3 days. During those 3 days, she came to the library every morning and worked at the round table, and sometimes he came and worked at the large desk in the corner, and they did not speak very much, but the silence between them was not the silence of 2 strangers who have nothing to say to each other. It was the silence of 2 people who are thinking. On the 4th day, she brought him tea, not because it was her place to do so, because she had noticed, in her meticulous way of noticing things, that he forgot to drink it when it was brought by the household, that the cup would sit at his elbow and cool while he worked, and that he always looked faintly surprised when he finally reached for it and found it cold. So she brought him a fresh cup at the moment she calculated he would be ready for it, and set it down beside his hand, and said nothing. He picked it up. He drank it warm. He looked at her across the library as she went back to her own table, and whatever he did not say in that moment sat between them as clearly as if he had said it. 3 days before the Hathaway ball, the ball of the season, the event at which the entirety of London society would be present, Lady Constance moved to stage 3. It was not subtle. She had not intended it to be subtle. The story appeared first in a particular letter that circulated, as such letters do, through drawing rooms and afternoon calls with the speed of something carefully released. The letter suggested, not stated, suggested, with the deniability of implication, that Miss Cecily Wren had been observed, prior to the Duke's interest in her, attempting to arrange a separate match with a gentleman who had subsequently declined to pursue the acquaintance, and that the family's financial situation was such that Miss Wren had been known to sell items from the family's household to cover debts that her father refused to acknowledge. It was framed as concern. It was devastating. Cecily heard about it from Lady Hathaway's daughter, who told her with the bright, anxious eyes of a girl who was not sure whether she was doing her a kindness or not, and who said, "I thought you ought to know, because there are people saying it everywhere, and I am sure it is nonsense. But, thank you," Cecily said. "You are very kind." She went home. She sat in the library at the round table. She thought about leaving. She did not mean London. She meant the arrangement. She could end it now. Before the ball. Before whatever Lady Constance had planned for the ball. And she could end it cleanly and without further damage to herself, because she had not yet lost more than she began with, and she could still walk away with her dignity technically intact, which was more than many women could say. She thought about the 7 creditors, now paid. She thought about Dorothea's season, which was now possible. She thought about the library. She thought about the round table. She thought about a man who had counted her notations and called them the right questions. She thought about what it would mean to leave, and what it would mean to stay, and which of those 2 things was an act of courage, and which was an act of habit. She was still thinking about it when the library door opened and the Duke of Haverstone came in. He stood in the doorway. He was holding a piece of paper. "I have seen the letter," he said. "I expected you had," she said. He came into the room and sat down, not at his desk but in the chair across the round table from her, which he had never done before. He put the paper down between them. She did not look at it. "You are going to tell me," she said, "that you intend to address it somehow." "I am going to ask you something first," he said. She looked at him. "When I came to you," he said, 6 weeks ago, "when I asked you to play my fiancée for a season, you said you had conditions. You were very clear about what you wanted. You were also very clear," he paused, "about what you did not expect." "Yes," she said. "You did not expect to be chosen," he said. "You expected to be useful. You have spent your entire life being useful to everyone and chosen by no one, and you had come to terms with that in a way that I found." He stopped. He looked at the table for a moment. "I found it significant," he said, "that a woman of your qualities had been brought to consider usefulness and invisibility as her permanent condition." She was not going to cry. She had a rule. "I have not been invisible to you," she said, very carefully. "No," he said, "you have not." He looked at her then, directly, without the controlled reserve he used with everyone else, and she saw for the first time what was underneath it, which was not coldness at all, but a kind of carefully maintained distance, the distance a man keeps between himself and the things he is afraid to want because he has been hurt by wanting before. "I would like," he said, "to go to the Hathaway ball with you, not as a performance, not as a transaction, as the man who intends to stand beside you in front of all of London and tell them exactly who you are, because I have had the significant advantage of actually paying attention." She breathed. "And afterward?" She said. "1 second. 2. 3. Afterward," he said, "I would like to ask you a different question than the one I asked 6 weeks ago. If you will permit me, the Hathaway ball was everything these events always were. Too many candles, too much perfume, a staircase designed for being seen descending, and 400 people who had all come for the ostensible purpose of dancing and the actual purpose of watching each other." Cecily descended the staircase on the arm of the Duke of Haverstone. She was wearing blue, which she had never worn before because she had been told once, in the careless way these things are said, that it did not suit her. It suited her very much. She had done her own hair for the last time, because in the past 2 days something had shifted in the architecture of the arrangement, and she had accepted the help of a maid named Ellen, who was very good with pins and had strong opinions about pearl clips, and the result was something that Cecily looked at in the mirror and recognized as herself, which was not a feeling she had in mirrors often. The room watched them come down. She could feel it. The specific quality of attention that 400 people generate when they are trying to appear not to be looking while looking. She kept her eyes forward. She felt his arm steady under her hand, not rigid, but settled, the arm of a man who had decided what he was going to do and was not reconsidering it. Lady Constance was standing near the center of the room. She had positioned herself well. She always positioned herself well. She was wearing white, and she had the specific brightness of a woman who has been waiting for a moment and has arrived at it. Around her were 3 other women, the kind of women who constitute the hard center of a social world, the ones whose opinions propagate outward like ripples until the entire surface is changed. She spoke before Cecily and the Duke were 6 feet away from her. "Miss Wren," she said, with a warmth so precise it could have been measured, "how brave of you to come this evening. I understand the last weeks have been somewhat trying." Cecily stopped. The room had that particular quality of held breath that large rooms get when something real is about to happen. "Lady Constance," she said. "I do hope you know," said Lady Constance, "that there is no one here who does not understand the position you find yourself in. We have all been very concerned for you." She glanced at the Duke with the expression of a woman indicating, without saying so, that his presence was the subject of concern rather than its remedy. It cannot be easy. After all, everyone can see what the arrangement is. You deserve to be told plainly, there is no shame in a practical alliance. We simply feel for you. The room was quiet. 1 second. 2. "Lady Constance," said the Duke of Haverstone. She turned to him with the particular grace of a woman who has been waiting for a man to speak. "I wonder," he said, "whether you might clarify what arrangement you are referring to." "Why, your engagement," she said. "We are all very pleased for Miss Wren. Naturally, it is very generous of you." "Generous," he said. "To raise a woman of," she paused, selecting her word with the care of a marksman selecting a shot, "of modest circumstances and no particular consequence to the position of Duchess. It speaks well of you." "I see," said the Duke. "You believe I have offered my name to a woman of no consequence as an act of charity. I believe nothing unkind," she said. "We all admire her quiet management of a difficult family situation. She has kept the household running on very little, I understand, for some years." "She has," he said. Yes, he did not say it with any apology. He said it as a man states a fact he finds admirable. She managed the Grosvenor Square household from the age of 15 on an income that would have defeated most trained housekeepers. She reviewed 3 years of my estate accounts in 2 weeks and identified 12 errors and 3 material economies that my steward had missed entirely. She negotiated conditions with me before she agreed to anything, because she understands her own value, even when others have consistently failed to demonstrate that they understand it. He paused. "She is the most practically capable woman I have met in 32 years, and she has been treated as furniture in her own house for the better part of a decade, because she was not pretty enough or frivolous enough to suit the particular aesthetic requirements of the people around her." Lady Constance's smile had not moved, but something behind it had. "Miss Wren has been a credit to her family," he continued. "She has asked nothing of anyone. She has managed everything and been thanked for nothing, and she agreed to a very strange proposal from a difficult man, because she had the courage and the clarity to see what it actually was, rather than what it looked like. I imagine," he said, "that this is what good judgment looks like. But it requires a certain willingness to pay attention." He looked at Lady Constance with the specific, measured look of a man who is about to say something he has chosen carefully. "I am also aware," he said, "that 3 years ago you wrote a series of letters to my solicitor inquiring as to whether a personal connection between us might be formalized. I declined to respond to those letters. I do not believe the circumstances at the time made a polite response possible. I should perhaps have been more direct then. I will be direct now. Your concern for Miss Wren's welfare has been very warmly expressed in several drawing rooms. and it has been equally warmly reported to me, and I find that I do not consider it concern at all." Lady Constance's smile became a very different thing. "Miss Wren is not a charity case," he said. "She is the woman I have chosen, not because I had no better option, because I had the extraordinary good fortune to sit in a drawing room and notice the one person in it who was actually doing something real." He turned from Lady Constance. He turned to Cecily. She was looking at him. Her eyes were doing that thing again, shifting, the specific grey that moved toward blue in certain lights, and he could see that she was keeping her face very composed, that she had a rule about this, a rule he had come to understand over the past weeks without ever being told it directly. The rule that said she did not let the difficult things show. He wanted to tell her she could let it show. Here now, he wanted to tell her that she had managed everything alone long enough. "Miss Wren," he said. "Cecily." It was the first time he had used her given name. In public, in front of 400 people, in front of all of London. "I did not bring you here to perform an arrangement," he said. "I brought you here because I intend to ask you, in front of every person who has looked past you in the past 10 years, whether you will do me the very considerable honor of becoming my wife, not at the end of 6 weeks. Now, tonight, because I have been paying attention, and what I have seen is, I believe the word I want is remarkable." She breathed. Somewhere in the room someone moved. The held breath released in a murmur that swept the room like a tide. Cecily Wren had a rule. She had kept it for 8 years. She had kept it through grief and management and invisibility and the particular daily ache of being the person who wound the clock and was never thanked for keeping the time. The rule said that tears changed nothing. She had believed it sincerely. She discovered now that she had been wrong, or rather, that the rule had been made by a girl protecting herself from pain, and that she was standing in a room full of light with a man who had just told 400 people that she was remarkable, and this was not pain, and the tears that came to her eyes were not the tears the rule had been made to prevent. She did not cry, but she allowed herself, for one moment, to stop preventing it, to let her eyes be bright, and her throat be tight, and her face to do the thing faces do when something that has been held for a very long time is finally allowed to release. "Yes," she said. Her voice was perfectly steady. "Yes, I will." The room exhaled, and Callum Ashford, the 6th Duke of Haverstone, who had not smiled without calculation or self-consciousness since he was a young man who read too much poetry, smiled now, in front of 400 witnesses, in the full and unreserved way that he had been almost smiling for 6 weeks. It was worth the wait. He took her hand. It was not the careful, deliberate gesture of a man performing for an audience. It was the gesture of a man who had decided something, and whose hand simply went where it intended to go, which was to the hand of the woman beside him. Around them, the room moved. Lady Constance retreated. The orchestra, who had been suspended in the bewildered manner of musicians who do not know whether to keep playing or stop, made a collective decision and began again, softly. Something in 3/4 time that suited the moment better than silence. Several people came to offer congratulations. Cecily received them with the composure that was her natural register, warm where she had once been carefully neutral, and she noted, with the private satisfaction of someone who has been recording data her whole life, that 3 women who had looked through her in the last 6 weeks were now looking at her with the particular expression of people rapidly revising a calculation they had been confident in. She did not say anything about this. She did not need to. Callum said, very quietly, as the 3rd well-wisher moved away, "You are doing that thing." "What thing?" she said. "The thing where you are thinking something quite pointed and choosing not to say it." "I am always thinking something," she said. "I know," he said. "I find it, I believe the word is reassuring." She looked at him sideways. "You find it reassuring that your wife is constantly thinking pointed things?" "My wife," he said, and the 2 words came out differently than the sentence around them. Quieter, more careful, The way you say something you have been holding for a while and are finally allowing yourself to hold openly has excellent judgment. I would rather know she is exercising it than worry that she is not." She was quiet for a moment. "You called me your wife," she said. "You said yes," he said. "I assumed that was the implication." It was almost teasing. She had not previously known he was capable of almost teasing. It was, she decided, a very good development. 6 months later, on a morning in April that had decided to be warm ahead of schedule, light came through the library windows at Ashford Park and lay across the round table in long golden rectangles. The curtains had been taken down in January and replaced with lighter ones that let the spring in. The shelves had been dusted. The books had been catalogued. This had been a 2-month project that Cecily had undertaken with the assistance of a young footman who turned out to have strong opinions about alphabetical versus thematic organization, and whose opinions she had welcomed because they were reasonable, and she had learned that reasonable opinions were welcome in this house. The garden, too, had been reopened. It had been a formal garden once, visible from the library window, and it had been allowed to go to wildness over 4 years of neglect. In February she had found it under the snow, and assessed it with the same eye she brought to household accounts, which was the eye of someone who looks at what is actually there, not what she wishes were there, and who calculates from that reality toward what might be possible. By March it was being worked. By April, the first thing to bloom in it, small and white and extremely pleased with itself, was a climbing rose on the south wall. Cecily stood at the library window and looked at the rose. "It is not very impressive yet," said a voice behind her. "No," she said, "but it is there." She felt his hands settle on her shoulders, familiar now, the specific warmth of them, and she leaned back slightly, and he stayed where he was, which was close. "You are going to tell me," he said, "that by August it will cover the entire wall." "I am going to tell you," she said, "that if it is properly tended it will." "And will it be properly tended?" "I intend to tend it myself," she said. She felt, rather than heard, the breath of something that was not quite a laugh, but was adjacent to it, warm against the top of her head. "Cecily," he said. "Callum," she said. There was a pause. "I was paying attention that first day," he said, "in the drawing room. I want you to know that. I was not being accidentally kind. I was paying attention." She turned. She looked up at him. The morning light was on his face, and the old scar at his jaw, and the dark eyes that were not cold, had never been cold. She understood now, were only careful, which is what you become when you have learned that the things you want can be taken from you, until you find something worth the risk of wanting again. "I know," she said. "I saw you see me." He looked at her for a moment with the open, unreserved expression she had come to know as his actual face, underneath the management of it. "Good," he said. Outside the window, the rose on the south wall was very small, and very white, and extremely determined, and the April sun was on it, and the library where the round table stood in the good light smelled of cedar and paper, and the particular domestic warmth of a house that has been brought back to itself. It was enough. More than enough. It was everything. Thank you for listening to this story all the way to the end. Please tell us which city you are watching from and what this story made you feel. Don't forget to subscribe so you will never miss a new story.